Okay, we're live, everybody.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the penultimate press conference of AAS 238. It is 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, June 9th, and the topic at hand is fast radio bursts in exoplanets and brown dwarfs. My name is Luna Zagorac, and I'm a PhD candidate studying cosmology and dark matter at Yale University and the Astrobites media intern for AAS 238. I'm joined by fellow final year graduate student and AAS media fellow, Tarun Konchadi, as well as Rick Feinberg, the Society's press officer. I would like to mention that the previous briefings materials are online in the press kit, and the releases and videos from today's briefings will be added to the kit by the end of the day. We are also live streaming this session to YouTube, where the recording will be posted later. And I will be starting with a brief introduction to the topics before I introduce the panelists, who will then speak in order of introduction. We will save Q&A for the end to make sure that everyone has enough time to speak. To ask a question, please pop it in the Q&A box and include who the question is for, your name, and your affiliation, please. And if you see a really good question come through, you can upvote it and bring it to the top of the queue. At the end, Rick will take the Q&A portion and read the questions out loud to the panelists for those who are watching over YouTube stream and can't access the Q&A to read it. We've also asked presenters not to answer questions via text while other presentations are ongoing, so the Q&A will only proceed at the end. Furthermore, if you have any issues or would just like to chat to your fellow press colleagues, we ask to use the Slack channel, #press_conferences, which Tharani will be monitoring. And this briefing will be a bit unusual. There are only 3 presentations, but 10 presenters, including a high school student. And furthermore, we will be hearing on 2 separate topics. Fast radio bursts, or FRBs, are extremely energetic, short pulses of radio waves lasting a matter of milliseconds. They could be the product of any number of high-energy astrophysical processes and may or may not occur regularly. Most of them have extragalactic origins, and the first Milky Way FRB was detected by CHIME in 2020. A brown dwarf, on the other hand, is a type of substellar object that has a mass between the most massive giant gas planets and the least massive stars, approximately 13 to 80 times that of Jupiter. They are too low in mass to fuse hydrogen into helium and become main sequence stars, and so are labeled substellar. However, they are massive enough to fuse deuterium, which sets them apart from giant planets. With that, the presentations in order will be fast radio bursts from a handful to hundreds with CHIME/FRB. This will be presented by Kiyoshi Masui of MIT, Alex Josephy of McGill, and Mohit Bhardwaj, also of McGill. Next, we will hear on a statistical search for chemical signatures of planet formation in sun-like stars. This will be presented by Jacob Neubauer from the University of Pennsylvania. Finally, we will hear on using proper motions from CATWISE 2020 to uncover new objects in the solar neighborhood. This will be presented by Tarun Kota of Eastview High School. And for the Q&A portion, Davy, Kirkpatrick, and Dan Caselden will join him as backup. I will now ask all the panelists, except for the CHIME FRB team, to turn off their video, and we'll ask the speakers to unmute and commence screen sharing and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Kiyoshi Masui, and I'm here with my colleagues Alex Josephy and Mohit Bhardwaj. And we're going to tell you about, and we're here on behalf of the CHIME FRB collaboration. And we're very excited to tell you about this new phase of the fast radio burst field that is beginning with the release of the first sample of hundreds of bursts that have been discovered with the CHIME FRB experiment. So what are fast radio bursts? So fast radio bursts are very bright, very brief, typically milliseconds long, flashes of radio light that are coming from other galaxies. We think that these are being created by neutron stars, in particular a subclass of neutron stars called magnetars. The reason we think that's true is because they are the only thing that we know of that could plausibly be produce such energetic flashes in such a short duration of time. Otherwise, we don't really know how they are created. how the magnetars might make these bursts. There are a plethora of theories, but nothing that tells us, which ones could be right and which ones could be wrong. And so they are still very mysterious. One of the things that limits our to really a really good understanding of them. One of the truly special things about fast radio bursts is this property called dispersion. As the burst signal propagates through space, it gets distorted by the very diffuse plasma that lives in the cosmos, very diffuse gas. We can measure this distortion very, very precisely. So for every one of these bursts, we know exactly how much matter it passed through. This carries a record within it of the structure of the universe that has traveled through on its way to get from the source to us. Because of this, we think that they are going to be the ultimate tool for studying the universe. With enough of them, we want to use them to map out where all the stuff is in the universe, what the structure of the universe is, and how it's distributed on very large scales. And that will tell us a lot about how the universe evolves, how gas falls into galaxies to form stars, how it gets expelled again by supernova and black holes. The thing about FRBs is that they are really hard to catch. You have to have your radio telescope pointed in just the right place at just the right time, and you can't predict where or when that will be. Because most radio telescopes see only a tiny patch on the sky, maybe an area in the sky the size of the moon at a given time, the vast majority of FRBs that happen, they go unseen by anyone. CHIME solves this problem through its all-digital design. So CHIME has no moving parts. And so instead of pointing a big dish where we want to look, we do all of our steering and focusing of the light through digital signal processing. This lets us point our telescope in many directions simultaneously. So we can cover hundreds of square degrees of the sky simultaneously. That's equivalent to over 1,000 times the area of the moon. Then we use the rotation of the Earth, the fact that the Earth spins, to point our telescope in different directions to survey different regions of the sky. To put sort of the number of FRBs that are known into numbers, so this is what the first FRB was discovered in 2007 in archival data. And in the decade between 2007 and when CHIME first started taking observations in July of 2018, this is all the FRBs that had been that were known. So this is a map of the sky, and each one of these little markers on that map was a known FRB in July 2018. Here's what that map looked like 1 year later, 1 year into CHIME operations. So all these yellow markers here are CHIME discovered fast radio bursts, and the blue triangles are CHIME discovered repeating sources, spots in the sky that have been seen to emit multiple FRBs over the survey. So these two classes of sources collectively make up the CHIME FRB catalog. So what does the catalog contain? Well, it contains 535 fast radio bursts observed between July of 2018 and July of 2019. That compares to roughly 140 that had been seen by all other telescopes in the world over more than a decade, up to today. That 535 includes 61 bursts from 18 repeating sources. And it includes the properties that we've measured of each one of these bursts. So the time when the burst happened, the sky location, the brightness, the duration, and that all-important property that I mentioned before called dispersion. So this is the first large sample of FRBs discovered with a single survey and all detected in the same way and all analyzed in the same way. And so this will, for the first time, enable, studies of the FRB population. This is in contrast to studying individual specimens of FRBs, which is largely how the field has made progress in the past. So this represents just a new phase in FRB science. We are making a transition from studying specimens to populations. This also presents an opportunity to study the large-scale structure of the universe, to use that record contained in the dispersion to map out where the matter is in the universe. And so not only are we going to learn much more about these fast radio bursts, but we're going to transition to this this idea that we will use them as probes of the universe. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alex Josephy, who will tell us about what we've learned from this catalog so far.
Thanks. So if we want to say something about the FRB population as a whole, then what we're missing can end up being just as important as what we're detecting. Like any telescope, CHIME has its own set of observational biases that will transform what's really out there into what we end up seeing. We've managed to correct for these biases by running a big simulation where we add fake bursts to our real data and see what we do and don't detect. We've done this correction for a number of properties, but I'll just highlight two of the results here today. First, we've measured a brightness distribution, which is consistent with FRBs being uniformly distributed everywhere in the universe. We also get a rate, which is about 800 bright FRBs per day happening anywhere on the sky. This works out to roughly 2 per minute. Next slide, please. So if FRBs are really cosmological, then there really shouldn't be any preferred direction that they're coming from. This plot shows our observed sky distribution. Note that this is a different coordinate system than what was just shown. Here we have the galactic plane running horizontally through the center. The colored area is our field of view, and each dot is a FRB detected by CHIME. As you might have noticed, these dots aren't so perfectly evenly distributed. Now, continuing on the theme of correcting for biases, we need to consider a number of effects here. First and foremost, we need to know where we're looking and for how long. We also need to understand our telescope sensitivity and how it changes across the sky. And we need to understand our own galaxy and how it interferes with FRBs. Only after correcting for all these observational biases do we find evidence for a uniform distribution on the sky. And this evidence is quite strong. This validates our understanding of the telescope and really supports the idea that our sample is truly cosmological. Next slide, please. Now, when we say uniformly distributed, we really mean no preferred direction overall. This does break down at some point, though. It's long been theorized that if we had enough FRBs, we'd find that they're not perfectly uniform, but instead tend to trace out the large scale structure in the universe. These large structures make up the filaments of the cosmic web, and the scale here is truly immense. These bright spots are clusters of thousands and thousands of galaxies embedded in massive amounts of dark matter. With the first CHIME FRB catalog, for the first time, we have detected this correlation between FRBs and large scale structure. This is really, really exciting and ushers in a new era of FRB cosmology. The next slide, please. So another great thing we can do with a large sample of bursts is look for subpopulations amongst it. So one place to look for patterns is in the fingerprints of these bursts, or how they're structured in frequency and time. On the left here, I'm showing two examples of these burst fingerprints. Note that the horizontal black lines here are data we've had to remove. It's radio interference from things like cell phones or TV stations. Looking at these bursts, we've noticed some fairly striking differences, however. We say the one on the left is broadband. It extends the full frequency range that we're sensitive to. The one on the right, however, is relatively narrow band and much more complex. It's longer direction, has a longer duration, is spikier, even sort of drifting down in frequency and time. Amazingly, these differences between the two bursts I've shown is something that's echoed in the population at large. And that's what the plot on the right is showing. One-off bursts tend to have large bandwidth and short duration, whereas repeaters tend to have small bandwidth and long duration. This is a really exciting result that points to truly distinct subcategories of FRBs. Now, I've been highlighting some of the statistical tests we've been doing. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Mohit, who will show some particularly interesting FRB sources. Thanks.
So as Alex said, in addition to various statistical analysis that we have performed using the CHIME FRB catalog sources, we have also localized one repeating fast radio burst from the catalog FRB 2018-1030A. Now, what makes FRB 2018-1030A interesting is that its burst property, especially the amount of dispersion suffered by the radio waves on its way to the Earth, suggests that it has a nearby host. Now, fortunately, we are able to localize this FRB to a sky area, which is around 140 times smaller than the moon on the sky, by using multiple recently detected repeat bursts from this FRB. 4 of these bursts are shown on the right side of the slide. So let's look at what we found within its localization region. Next slide, please. So here you can see that the FRB's localization region as a sine ellipse laid over an optical image. And the galaxy that catches your attention, I think, almost instantly when you look at this image is NGC 3252. So it is a spiral galaxy like Milky Way, which is actively converting its gas into stars. Now, what makes this even more interesting is the fact that it is located at a distance of around 65 million light years. Now, to give you an idea of how close the source is, 65 million light years is nearly 25 times the distance between our home galaxy, the Milky Way, and our nearest big neighbor, Andromeda. So for all intents and purposes, this galaxy is in our neighborhood. And by the way, we are confident that this is the FRB's host galaxy because the probability of finding a galaxy like NGC 3252 purely by chance within the FRB localization region is pretty small. So this makes FRB 2018-1030A the second closest extragalactic FRB discovered to date. Next slide, please. Now, in order to understand the implication of this discovery, I need to provide you some context. Now, before 2021, the closest extragalactic FRB was FRB 2018-0916A. By the way, another CHIME discovery, which is located at a distance of around 486 million light years, roughly 7.5 times away from NGC 3252. But CHIME FRB recently has broken its own record by discovering a very nearby FRB, which is located at a distance of around 12 million light years in the Messier 81 galaxy, one of the closest bright galaxy to the Milky Way. Now, these local universe fast radio bursts that CHIME is finding are possibly the most important sources to basically constrain different models, mainly because our current telescopes have limited sensitivity. Therefore, these local universe FRBs are our best hope for testing various FRB models, studying their local environment in great detail, and seeing if there is a concurrent FRB emission in other bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, such as optical, infrared, or even X-rays. Therefore, with this discovery, we have added one more valuable local universe fast radio burst for various multi-wavelength analysis and follow-up. Next slide, please. Now, in conclusion, with the first catalog of 535 fast radio bursts, CHIME FRB has marked a new phase in this field in which hundreds of FRBs are found and studied, transforming this whole field into big data science. In fact, anyone from anywhere in the world can access this website shown here on this slide and download the entire catalog. So please stay tuned for more analysis results, both from us and from other members of the FRB community. So this brings me to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
You should be able to see my screen now. Hello everyone, my name's Jacob Neubauer. I just finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania. And today I'm gonna be sharing some recent results from a project that I led on signatures of planet formation in the chemical composition of stars. This work was accepted for publication in the Astrophysical Journal and can also be found on the archive. So to start, over the past decade roughly, astronomers have uncovered this incredibly diverse population of exoplanets spanning a wide range of parameter space from hot Jupiters to super Earths. The majority of these exoplanets have been discovered using the transit method, when a planet passes between a star and the observer, momentarily reducing the brightness of the central star, as you just saw. While no doubt wildly successful, the transit method does have some key limitations. For instance, it's preferential to planets with short orbital periods and large radii. and also requires the chance alignment of a transiting planet with our line of sight. So because of this, any new technique which can give us a probabilistic constraint on whether or not a star might host an exoplanet would be extremely valuable to astronomy and the search for Earth-like planets around sun-like stars. So one way to do this potentially is by measuring the distribution of light over a range of frequencies to obtain the spectrum of a star. So from this spectrum, as you see, emission and absorption lines can help us map the chemical composition of the stellar surface, which may contain detectable signatures of planet formation. So what does this mean? To make this idea a bit more concrete, consider two stars, star A and star B. Both have nearly identical radiative cores in purple, convective envelopes in the outer layers in yellow, and they're surrounded by this circumstellar disk of gas and dust. So in the case of star A, let's say rocky planets form out of this disk, whereas star B, on the other hand, will undergo different mechanisms and form no such rocky planets. So as you can see, star A retains less of the rock-forming terrestrial building blocks in its outer layers here compared to star B, since these rock-forming materials are locked up in the rocky planets. So these rock-forming materials are foundational to the formation of terrestrial planets like our own, and they're called refractory elements. So with this picture in mind, it's at least conceivable that stars with rocky planets may have different surface compositions compared to stars without surrounding rocky planets. So that's the basic idea. And in 2009, a pioneering work from Jorge Melendez and collaborators, they showed that the sun, a rocky planet host, of course, appears to be depleted in refractory elements compared to around a dozen sun-like stars. So while this finding is extremely intriguing and other studies have reproduced it and it's been the subject of long debate, work in this area has been based on very limited sample sizes using extremely precise spectral measurements due to the very subtle nature of this depletion signature. Because of this, larger sample sizes are certainly needed to work towards connecting the composition of stars to the properties and presence of planets. Luckily, though, it's a very exciting time for large-scale spectroscopic studies, with surveys like Apogee providing spectral measurements and chemical abundance determinations for hundreds of thousands of Milky Way stars. Apogee is a continuation of the SDSS program and has completely revolutionized our view of the Milky Way's formation history. Still, in order to use this amazingly powerful data set to potentially detect signatures of planet formation in the composition of stars, some clever statistical techniques must be developed because the signal-to-noise ratio is very small for the purposes of this sort of analysis, detecting refractory element depletion patterns in sun-like stars. So to overcome this problem, we've developed this new approach utilizing Bayesian statistical techniques, which allows us to develop a global picture of stellar composition and its possible relation to planet formation. So with this new modeling framework in hand, we're able to study significantly larger populations of stars with lower signal-to-noise measurements. And perhaps most notably, our modeling framework allows the data to speak for itself by grouping stars with similar chemical abundance patterns together in order to identify distinct populations which may be related to planet formation. So the result of applying this modeling framework to Apogee data with over 1,500 sun-like stars and 5 elements can be illustrated as follows here. So first, the vertical axis is plotting the chemical abundance scale with a value of 0 corresponding to the sun's chemical abundance. The horizontal axis is the condensation temperature of the elements. This means that elements which are more refractory or rock forming fall towards the right, and elements which are more volatile or more gas-like throughout the planet-forming disk fall towards the left. And for the first time, we found highly significant evidence for 2 distinct stellar populations over a very large sample of stars, this is around 1,500, separated by their abundances in these rock-forming refractory elements. And the first population shown here roughly matches the sun's chemical abundance pattern, whereas the second population in blue is comparatively enriched in these rock-forming elements. Fittingly, we call these 2 populations depleted and not depleted respectively. And combined, these 2 distinct groups form the overall distribution of chemical abundances for our 1,500 sun-like stars across a range of condensation temperatures. And perhaps most interestingly, we find that the majority of stars are described by this depleted population in red with greater than 60% belonging to this group. So this means that most sun-like stars appear to have similar refractory abundance patterns to the sun, while roughly 20% or so of sun-like stars are comparatively enriched in these refractory elements. Now, this finding is a little bit surprising because previous high precision studies with significantly smaller samples have found that the average sun-like star appears to be enhanced in refractory elements compared to the sun. So this is one of those works which makes the sun appear somewhat unusual or anomalous in its surface composition in that it appears to be missing refractory elements. Through our analysis, we've demonstrated that this seemingly anomalous abundance pattern does not necessarily mean that the sun is unusual after all. So let me show you what I mean here. In this plot, the green curve shows our model for the distribution of chemical abundances across our sample, and the teal line that's being traced out depicts the average chemical abundance from the more volatile end of the x-axis on the left here to the more refractory end on the right. And clearly we can see here that the presence of the not depleted blue population, given by this peak here that's shifting upwards, that population, even though it makes up a minority of stars, it can actually tip the average chemical abundance from low to high values, making the sun appear to be depleted in refractory elements, when really the sun is part of the majority group after all. So this was a bit of a mystery that we were able to make some progress on potentially by developing this Bayesian modeling approach. So just to wrap up and summarize here, we've developed a new modeling approach which enables us to combine measurements across many stars in order to obtain a high significance constraint from individually low signal to noise measurements. We've also found strong evidence for two distinct stellar populations, one with an abundance pattern that roughly matches the sun, and another which is comparatively enhanced in refractory elements. We've also found that the majority of stars, or over 60%, have a similar refractory depletion pattern to the sun. Furthermore, this is interesting, the 60% estimate is not far off from estimates of Eta Earth or the fraction of stars with rocky planets. So statistically, at least, our results seem to support this idea that perhaps there's a link between the detailed chemical composition of a star and rocky planet formation. So just very quickly, what's next? Well, future studies will seek to more robustly connect these results to planet formation, potentially providing a new avenue in exoplanet discovery and characterization, maybe. And here are just a few specific future directions here, ranging from the presence of exoplanets to planetary engulfment by the central host star. Many of these could be underlying our interesting findings here, but I'll stop here and be happy to take any questions at the end. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tarun Kota, and I'm a junior at Eastview High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And my project is titled Using Proper Motions from CatWise 2020 to Uncover New Objects in the Solar Neighborhood. Really, at its core, our goal was to search for previously missed objects by previous surveys and searches. Specifically, we are focused on finding faint motion objects. And the reason that we are interested in trying to find faint motion objects is because these objects make up the majority of missing objects in certain sensitive regions. Overall, in the project, we were able to find 30 new objects, but the main three objects include two nearby M dwarfs with a distance of 14.5 and 22.5 parsecs respectively, and a T2 dwarf with high velocity. Really, what this means is that despite many efforts over the last decade, discoveries near the sun are still to be made. So taking a step back, what are the objects found? Well, M dwarfs are the most common stars in the Milky Way, but the reason that our M dwarfs are really unique is because of its close proximity to the sun. Well, if they're so close, why were they missed in the past? Well, the reason for that was that our two M's have a very small motion and therefore really hard to detect with previous telescopes. Even Gaia, a very sensitive database, still hasn't determined the proximity of our objects. But looking at the two gifts on the top, you can see our two M dwarfs barely moving back and forth, which further illustrates the small motion of the object. Secondly, cold brown dwarfs are hard to find, and our T2 dwarf was missed because of its exceptional faintness. On the bottom gift, you can see that small dot moving back and forth illustrates our T2 dwarf. However, despite our efforts, the coldest objects, we don't really know if they're rare, or rather, we're not just looking at the wrong place, we're looking at the wrong wavelength. So taking a step back, look at who are we and what do we use? Well, this project was really spearheaded by three individuals, me, Tarun Kota, as well as Dan Caselden, who's a cybersecurity researcher turned a citizen scientist, and Dr. J. Davy Kirkpatrick, who's an astronomer at Caltech IPAC. And this atypical collaboration was made possible by Backyard Worlds Plan 9, as well as Student Astrophysics Society. For a project, we used CATWISE 2020. And CATWISE 2020 essentially combines 8 years of data from the WISE telescope to give unparalleled motion accuracy on the objects of interest. However, the question arises is how do we search through the 1.9 billion objects in CATWISE and find the objects that we want? Well, to solve this problem, we came up with a supervised machine learning classifier. Essentially, this classifier would go through the CATWISE 2020 database and bring back candidates that match the parameters we set out. And to ensure the accuracy of our classifier, we trained it with known moving T and Y dwarfs. Overall, after we ran the classifier on CATWISE 2020, we were able to narrow down the almost 1.9 billion objects in CATWISE to 6,000 high interest candidates. But the main benefit of this was that we were able to save hours by avoiding manual searching methods, as well as the overall represent a shift from the traditional curing methods to the more modern machine learning methods. This is really important because as databases continue to grow, it's really important to find the most efficient ways to search for objects of interest. So once we had a candidate list, we needed to sort through the data and find out which objects were interesting and which objects were not interesting. Well, the main problem we had was that CATWISE only has one color, W1 minus W2. And we need more colors to figure out which objects are mundane and which objects are extraordinary. To get more colors, we needed more infrared data. So we first matched to other infrared databases like 2MASS, UHS, and BHS. After we had more infrared data, we were able to use a color diagram and essentially make a filtering mechanism. If you look at the diagram on the right, essentially any object that fell in the blue region was deemed interesting, while any object in other regions was deemed not interesting. Overall, we were able to find 30 unique objects, including 2 nearby dwarfs and the T2 dwarf with high motion. So for the future work of our project, really first we need more data on the interesting objects found. First, we plan on using SALT, which is a telescope in South Africa, and get a spectra of our 2 M dwarfs, as well as our T2 dwarf needs a space-based spectrum from a telescope like JWST. Thinking more broadly, despite our efforts, there are still gaps in sensitive objects near the sun. To really solve this problem, we first need to prioritize the quest for Y dwarfs. And Y dwarfs are just really faint objects and make up the majority of missing objects right now. And to really solve this problem, we need to fully explore CATWISE. Lastly, let's close out by a topic that's really important to me. Our trio represents the changing face of astronomy. With the rise to the internet, people now have access to a large astronomical data sets of resources. Really, what this means is that the public now has the opportunity to do astrophysics research. Thus, I want to highlight 2 really important resources. First is Student Astrophysics Society, which gives high schoolers like me the opportunity to do research, and Backyard Worlds Plan 9, which gives adults the opportunity to do research. Finally, I truly believe that future research will be spearheaded by astronomers and the public. That's why I really encourage everyone to go take the initiative and seek out opportunities for research and continue to explore the universe. Thank you.
Ready when you are, Luna.
Well, thank you to all of our wonderful presenters. And I saw you unmuted yourself, so I thought you were just going to take the Q&A away. So please, Rick, take the Q&A away.
All right, I'm going to take the Q&A away. All right, so just a reminder to everybody who's tuned in, please enter your questions for the presenters in the Q&A box. The first 2 questions are coming from Monica Young at Sky and Telescope, published by the AAS. First one is for Alex Josephy. Monica asks, can you say a bit more about the differences between the burst morphology for repeaters and non-repeaters? What does short duration and higher bandwidth mean for the physics of the single bursts? And does the different morphology mean that these are indeed two different populations? And I'll be happy to repeat parts of the question after you get started.
Thanks, that's a great question. Yeah, so the timescales and the bandwidths are really important tools and clues for theorists that are modeling not just what kind of objects are making these bursts, but what regions around them. If it's a magnetar or neutron star, what sections of the magnetosphere, or it's just a very important clue to how the bursts could be made. Now, as for how like definitive this separation is, I think I don't know if there's a consensus on that quite yet. One possibility is that the narrower or the shorter the bursts are, just the less frequent they repeat. So we could study this by looking at just our repeater bursts and seeing if the more prolific ones tend to be wider, but we don't quite have that statistical power in our first catalog. But that's something we're definitely pursuing, and it's an ongoing question.
Okay, so I think that answered everything, but if not, Monica can follow up in a minute. So her second question is for Mohit Bhardwaj. Monica asks, if magnetars were not the source of repeating FRBs for at least the two nearby ones from CHIME, what would the alternatives be? Are there any explanations you can lean towards personally?
So first of all, thank you very much, Monica, for this question. Now, as far as this FRB is concerned, like FRB 2018-1030A, actually we cannot say that it cannot have a magnetar region, because if you look at the localization region, it doesn't give any information that actually can rule out this. Or in fact, this is a spiral galaxy in star forming. So in these kind of galaxies, we expect magnetars to form. Now, regarding the closest extragalactic FRB we have localized, unfortunately, I cannot talk about that result because we have submitted that paper to Nature and it is under embargo, and I'm one of the main co-authors. But I think I can give you a generalized answer. So I think nobody can actually rule out right now whether the FRBs are, whether these nearby FRBs are not produced by magnetar, because there are more than one ways of producing magnetar. The one that I think most of us are really familiar is core collapse supernova, when a massive star at the end of its lifetime just undergo an explosion and forms a neutron star, in some cases magnetars. But there are other ways as well. There are delayed channels. For example, it is possible that two neutron stars or neutron star white dwarfs, which are like about to merge, and at the end of like merging stage, if they form magnetar, it is possible. There are other ways. For example, if you think of, there is another mechanism which is called accretion-induced collapse. So white dwarfs, which is another compact object that we expect sun, like our own sun, will be at the end of its lifetime. So it is possible that due to accretion, due to when these white dwarfs accrete excessively, then they can just explode and can form neutron star. It just go beyond limiting mass, which is called Chandrasekhar mass limit, and form a neutron star or magnetar. So there are many options. And I think the field of magnetars actually is sort of nascent, because I think it's only 2001 when we actually conclusively established that, okay, these are actually highly magnetized neutron stars. So, and I think FRB specifically are one of the best probes to actually understand their formation and how they form actually. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very thorough. Thank you. All right, the next question is from Pamela Gay, representing the Daily Space. This is for Jake Neubauer. Do we have the ability to consistently detect rocky worlds well enough around sun-like stars to test this relationship? If not, what kinds of data sets are needed?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a great one. So Kepler and TESS have discovered or confirmed over 4,000 exoplanets, right? But our observations or our detections of these planets are definitely preferential to detecting planets which are on short orbital periods with large radii, et cetera. So no, I don't think we found everything. There's still a lot of work to be done here, and we're really just getting started as a field. That said, though, I think there's huge potential using existing data sets like these large-scale spectroscopic surveys, Apogee, SDSS, cross-matching these data sets with data from, say, Kepler and TESS, and asking the question, we know that there's planets around these stars. Do the chemical compositions of these stars look different compared to, say, a control group that may not have detectable planets? And if there are distinct differences there, that will be really, really interesting. That's one way to take this a step further. More than that, though, just a small thought is that this new modeling approach acts sort of as a probability distribution. So we can basically take the chemical composition of a star as an input and see, does it belong to this depleted group or this not depleted group? And then we can furthermore see, are there any actual correlations between being a depleted and not depleted star and hosting a rocky planet or not hosting a rocky planet? So as we begin to discover more rocky planets around sun-like stars, we'll be able to get a better idea of the physical nature of this, the interesting chemical differences between stars.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next question is from textbook author Andrew Fracknoy, and this is for Tarun. And if Davy and Dan want to jump in on it too, that would be great. So Tarun, Andrew is asking, how many hours did you devote to this project? And how did you first get interested in doing astronomy work?
Yeah, so I started in September of 2020, and I devoted probably like 15 to 20 hours a week until right now, I guess. And so there really wasn't like one event or one like thing that got me into astronomy, but rather I've always liked nature, and I guess astronomy and nature have a lot in common. So I think eventually that love for, I'm from Minnesota, so we're really fortunate enough to have love wildlife and nature. So I think that love for nature eventually morphed into the love for astronomy.
So if I can add a follow-up, how did you connect with this particular project? And Davy and Dan, perhaps you can comment on whether Tarun's contribution is typical, or whether he went a little bit above and beyond here with the amount of energy that he devoted to it.
So I guess I can go first. The short answer is a bunch of emails. So I sent like almost 80 emails, and I got like one response back, but I was fortunate enough that Davy and Dan were willing to work with me. So I just sent emails to basically detailing why I wanted to work with them and what I wanted to do and stuff like that.
And I'll just add in here as well. Tarun's being a little coy here because he's done a lot more work than he's letting on he's done. And one of those things he's done is co-founding the Student Astrophysics Society, which he mentioned. And it was the Student Astrophysics Society that got in touch with me via Tarun back in, I think it was December, January, something like that. And they had just formed, and they were looking for astronomers to actually give them talks, because they have this large collection of high school students and undergraduate students who are interested in astrophysics, and they wanted to know how to connect to actual researchers and talk about potential projects and things like that. So I was fortunate enough to be the first astronomer that talked to the group. And in looking at this group on Zoom, of course, everything's been on Zoom since the pandemic, I looked at this and realized that this is a very diverse group of individuals that he'd managed to collect via the internet and just through his own, high school connections and the larger global community, really. And I said, this is really where I think diversity and inclusion initiatives need to go, because these are the people who want to get into astronomy. But if you look at a typical WES meeting, the WES meeting doesn't look like this group of individuals. So somewhere along the line, we're dropping people along the way. So I think this is a good connection for those of us who do want to get into these inclusion and diversity initiatives, to see how we can shepherd these people through to make sure they actually end up getting PhDs in astronomy if they want to do so. So I'll give him a lot of credit for setting up this group, because it's exactly what we need at this time, I think.
Terrific. Do you want to add anything, Dan?
Well, I think on the point of, is this typical? I think it's obvious that Tarun's performance is not typical of any high school student, at least none that I knew growing up. I don't know any high school students from my school that was leading real scientific discoveries in their spare time. It's fantastic. there are a few other bright stars out there, and Davy's doing a really good job of collecting and mentoring them. So it'll be exciting to see what we get in the future.
Terrific. Thanks to all of you. All right, so the next question comes from Ethan Siegel of Forbes and starts with a bang. He's asking it of Mohit, but I think that Alex is actually going to take it. As the CHIME results have taken us from 18 to more than 500 FRBs, it's remarkable that we only see the same two categories, repeaters and one-offs. Are there any other interesting divisions or subcategories that have emerged from the initial data set?
Yeah, so the repeaters versus one-offs is definitely the most stark separation, but yeah, we have found a few other interesting things. First, in the simulations we did to characterize our biases, we found that we're not very good, or it's harder to detect these really wide bursts. But despite our bias against those, we still do detect a fair number of them. So we think there's probably a subpopulation of highly scattered bursts. So these are bursts that have encountered some clumpy environment along their way to us and have been subsequently sort of smeared out. The other interesting subpopulation comes from the large scale structure cross-correlation analysis. So when you look at that correlation and you sort of divide things up and you see where the correlation is strongest, it turns out it's really the highly dispersed FRBs, the ones that we think are the most distant, which show the strongest correlations. This is the upshot of this is that these highly dispersed things might be a subpopulation with a lot of extra gas or material around them that leads to this high dispersion. So I think those are the two main subpopulations that are emerging, but yeah, we encourage others to look. There could be all kinds of interesting things in the data.
All right, thank you. So I don't see any more questions in the Q&A at the moment. Tharni, has anything shown up in the Slack chat?
Nothing outstanding aside from the associated press releases for this briefing.
Okay.
You posted.
I have a question I'd like to ask of the FRB team. How does this initial number, the 535, compare with what you might have predicted when you got started?
Yeah, I can take that. I think it's one of the maybe bold things about the CHIME FRB project is that when we started building it, no one knew how many FRBs were going to be at the frequencies we observe at. So all FRBs before 2015 had been observed at 1.4 gigahertz, which is a factor of 2 higher frequency, shorter wavelength than a CHIME observes at. And there were people that there were skeptics that told us that we wouldn't see anything because down at the frequencies we observe at, there will be too much absorption or too much scattering or something would obstruct the signal from us being able to see it. And so, you know, the estimates of how many we'd see went from 0 all the way up to, you know, very optimistic numbers of many, and we fell somewhere in between. I think we're very happy with the haul that we've brought in so far, and that we are continuing to bring in, and I think that's yeah, I think things worked out in our favor. I don't think we ever really doubted that we'd discover lots of FRBs, but there are certainly people that told us that we were wasting our time.
All right. Well, that might be it then. Luna or Tharni, do either of you have any questions for the panelists? No? All right. Well, there's no law of nature or of the AAS that says we can't quit a few minutes early and give people a chance to grab a snack or take a bio break before the next sessions begin. So I'll turn it back over to you, Luna.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Okay, so I would like to thank all of our presenters and also the collaborators standing by to help the presenters answer questions and also sing them much deserved praises. I would also like to thank the audience for being here, as well as everyone who helped with press releases and briefing prep. And finally, I would like to thank, or we would like to thank USRA, the University Space Research Association, that you can see in all of our backgrounds, for sponsoring the meeting and helping make all of this possible. And finally, I would like to say, if you just can't get enough of exoplanets and brown dwarfs, you're in luck. The next and last press conference of AAS 238 will take place at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time today, and it will be on exoplanets and brown dwarfs too. So make sure to join for that. Thank you, everyone.